everybody who's logged in. My name is Mary Beth Newville, and I'm one of the reference librarians in the Southern History Department at the Birmingham Public Library. And thanks to Mara for inviting me to do this class for you. This is an introduction to genealogy class, and we do a lot of these in person. So when we sit down with people, we say it's just a very casual class, almost a conversation about how to get started doing your genealogy research, what sort of records you're going to be looking for, how libraries can help you with that, and how you can, what sources you can find from home and on the internet. So I think we don't have so many people that we can't just take questions as they come. If you want to use the chat function on Zoom, you can type in a question, or I haven't got anybody muted, so if you want to just chime in with a question, feel free to do so. If you've got yourself muted, just make sure you unmute yourself before you ask your question. So we'll go ahead and get started. So genealogy, we always tell people when they're just getting started with their genealogy, the first thing to do is start with yourself and work your way backwards. You want to go from what you know to what you don't know. And one of the reasons that we tell people this is because a lot of families have legends and stories that they are descended from a historical figure or someone famous, and those are a lot of fun. But it can send you in the wrong direction if that's where you start your genealogy research. So you could spend a lot of time, maybe some money, tracking down a line that in the end isn't actually part of your family. The story that I always use as an example for this is that my husband's family on his father's side, the legend is that they are actually descended from Benjamin Franklin. And I'd heard this for ever and ever. And then one day I decided, you know what, it was right after the holidays and I'd spent some time with my in-laws and they were talking about Benjamin Franklin and how they have the Franklin chair in their house. And I'm like, really? You have a chair that belonged to Benjamin Franklin? You have a 200-year-old chair in your house? And I was just skeptical. And for the first time, I really started to think about this. And I told my husband, I said, I'm going to do a little bit of research. I'm going to see if your family is actually descended from Benjamin Franklin. And my husband says, he's like, that's fine, you know, do whatever. He says, but whatever you find out, if you find out that we're not descended from Benjamin Franklin, don't tell my dad. So apparently my father-in-law is a little more invested in this legend than my husband. And needless to say, I did my research and they are not descended from Benjamin Franklin, but I have never told my father-in-law. So they can continue to think that they are. But had they really decided that this was something that was, they wanted to research, and they just started researching descendants of Benjamin Franklin, of which there are some, then they would have gone off in a totally different direction, and they would never have the material that they needed on their own family. So the best thing is just to focus on the ancestors that you can document, and that will save you time, that will save you money, and it will save you a lot of frustration. So you want to work your way back from the known to the unknown, documenting each family a generation at a time. And the types of documentation that you can find and that you'll want to include in your research are what we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. After you've decided that you want to do your genealogy, talk to your family. Talk to not just older members of your family, but younger ones as well. Genealogy is the second most popular hobby in the United States. It is the fastest growing hobby. So there are already a lot of people out there who are very interested in family history. And certainly the shows on PBS, the Genealogy Roadshow, things like Who Do You Think You Are, have really increased people's interest in their genealogy. And that's really important, because I think for a long time you had people doing genealogy, or maybe people thought that you had to have a Mayflower descendant or a Jamestown ancestor before you could find your genealogy and do your research. And that's not true. Everybody's got a family history. Every family's got a story, and it just takes a little bit of time and patience to uncover that. So genealogy is for absolutely everybody. And so many things have made that so much easier, but there's no substitute for talking to members of your family. Like I said, if you don't have any older parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, then do talk to cousins and nieces and nephews, because they may have already started doing this type of research and may have some information that they would be happy to share with you. One of the great things about so much research being moved online is that it's so much easier to connect with people. You can find cousins and distant relatives that you never would have otherwise, and you can share information with them. You can scan documents and email them to each other and exchange all your notes and your research experiences. And genealogists are very generous, and they love to share information. They love to talk about their hobby, and they love to meet new relatives. So take advantage of how that is now available to you on the internet. When you are talking to an older relative, if you do have some grandparents or parents or older aunts and uncles that you talk to, take notes and have a lot of patience, because they may not have exact memory of dates and places, but what they're telling you is still going to give you very valuable clues that can help further your research. Once you've done a lot of genealogy, you are going to talk about, let me skip this one and go right here. You're going to talk about how you can get organized. You're going to start wondering, because before you've done very much research, you're going to realize that you have a lot of paper file. You have paper and you have digital files, and you're going to want to organize those. And there's no wrong way to organize your research. The way that you should organize it is just in a way that makes sense to you. If you're doing it all paper, decide how you want to keep that organized. Do you want to keep it by family name, by generation, by family group? There's lots of different ways you can organize your research. If you decide you're going all digital, there's some important things to keep in mind about how you want to save your files. It's never a good idea with any digital files or any important digital information to just put it in one place. You don't want to put all of your research and all your important documents and images on the hard drive of your desktop, because inevitably that hard drive is going to fail and you're going to have to get a new computer. And once that happens, you'll have lost all of that research. So you might want to think about some cloud storage, or saving it on on multiple different computers, or saving it on an external hard drive. Just keep your images, keep your files in more than one place. And the acronym that you can use to help remember that is LOCKSS, L-O-C-K-S-S. And that just stands for lots of copies keep stuff safe. So never put all of your important information just on one computer. Try to have it in multiple places if possible. With your paper documents, if you've got anything that's particularly fragile or something that you want to make sure you keep safe, like a newspaper clipping or a photograph or birth certificates, things like that, if possible, digitize those very fragile documents and then store the originals in a safe, environmentally secure space in your house. You want to look for a space that is free from lots of temperature fluctuations, free from any direct sunlight or the possibility of damage from moisture. So just, when you're thinking about where to store something like that, kind of think about your house. Attics often have problems with heat and high humidity. Basements, sometimes have the humidity, but also actual moisture problems. So you don't want to put any of your fragile originals in one of those places that will, increase their potential for damage. So what the best thing to do is get some archival safe, either sleeves or envelopes or something like that. Put your originals in those archival safe storage containers and then store them somewhere where they're out of direct sunlight and they're unlikely to be damaged by moisture. It's sometimes it can be kind of hard to do. We even here in the library have trouble sometimes with our environmental controls, and it's hot, it's muggy, it's July in Alabama, so sometimes you just have to do the best you can. And let's go back to this one. I do want to mention that there are already lots of places in your house or the houses of your family members where you could find things that would have genealogical value. Those can be things obviously like photo albums, school yearbooks, maybe letters that have been saved or newspaper clippings, but also things that might be less obvious to you, like someone's military discharge papers, even their tax returns. And don't overlook where people might have saved diplomas or notices of graduations. There are lots of things in our houses every day that may have genealogical value. Now, unfortunately, you may not find these unless an older relative has passed away and now you're cleaning out that person's house and you come across these items. But do be mindful that yeah, most people have many things in their house that will contribute to your genealogical research. Oh, I also want to mention that there are several genealogy sites that you can use if you want to keep your family tree in an online. If you don't want to write out your family tree, you want to keep it online. I've got a handout that I'm going to email to Mara at the library that's got some links in it that will direct you to some of the websites that you can use for keeping your family tree. And then there are also dedicated software programs that you can buy and install on your computer. And those are really handy, and they've gotten really good. You can upload photographs, pages from books, you can put in notes, and it's a really handy way to keep your genealogy organized, keep your family tree organized. And that way, if you're researching a kind of obscure relative and you've actually forgotten, this happens to me all the time, you've forgotten, how is this person related to me? Which great are they? Then you just click on their name and it tells you right there, oh, this is your 7th great grandfather, and these are his parents and these are his children, and this is how you're descended from him. So those can actually be really helpful. So do keep in mind that there are lots of electronic ways that you can be keeping your family trees and your research organized. Hopefully soon we'll all be able to go visit libraries and archives and courthouses again. And there are some tips that we like to have you keep in mind to make that visit go as smoothly as possible for you. Always call or at least visit the website before you go for whatever institution it is you're planning to visit. And that will just give you an idea about their general hours, the parking procedures, do you need to bring change for the copier? Just, kind of get all that housekeeping information out of the way before you go, and you'll be able to get more out of your visit that way, and you won't have to spend time figuring out those sort of little fiddly things. Many libraries, I would say most libraries now, and lots of archives have online catalogs, or at least collection descriptions, so that you can become familiar with their holdings. Spend some time on those online catalogs. Do some searching. If if there's something very specific that you're looking for, make sure that they have it. Make sure most research collections, I know here downtown in the Southern History Department, our collection is reference use only. And that means that none of the books can check out, and they don't go out on interlibrary loan. And so, that means that when a researcher comes to visit us, if there's something that they've come here specifically to see, we can promise them that it will be here, that it won't be checked out. But not every library that has genealogy materials is going to make them reference use only. So search their catalog, because the catalog will not only tell you what they have, it will tell you if that item is actually checked out or not. So when you're searching the catalog, do note, if it indicates that the item that you're looking for is actually on the shelf. And it's not a bad idea. People do this to us a lot. In fact, we encourage it. To call that library before you go and say, hey, I'm making a trip. I want to look at this particular book. Can you make sure and tell me that it's there? Because this is a big library. Mistakes happen. Books can get put in the wrong place on the shelf. Sometimes people might innocently take a book home with them. That's happened to us, and they bring it back. But it can be that if you're in the library and you haven't checked ahead of time, the librarian may not be able to put their hands on that item right away. So it could give you some peace of mind if you call ahead of time and just make sure that that item is where it's supposed to be when you're going to be there. While you're looking at the card catalog, just give yourself a really broad overview of what's in that library. Make a list of the items that you really want to see. That way, when you get to the library, if your time is limited, then you won't have to spend some of that time searching the card catalog or browsing the shelves while you're there. you're already going to know what you've come to see, and the librarian can help you pull it once you get there. Many archives and libraries now have a feature on their website called Ask a Librarian, and that will send you to an email, and you just submit your question and then click send, and that email goes to somebody at that library. We get many of these every week, and we're getting a lot more now that we're not open to the public. So take advantage of that, definitely, because if you've got a really simple question, let's say there is a book in a library that you're really interested in looking at, and that's the only thing. You only want one thing in that whole library. So, it may not be practical for you to plan a trip to that library. So the best thing for you to do is just send them an email. Say, hey, you've got this book. I can't find it anywhere else. Could you check, and see if so-and-so is listed in the index? Or maybe you even know that the person that you're researching is in that book, and you know what page you need from that book. Just send them an email and tell them that. And probably what they can do is either photocopy it for you and mail it to you, maybe for a small fee, or they could even scan it to you and send it to you in an email. So things have come a long way since I've been doing this type of work, which is about 20 years now. And there are lots of ways that libraries have to help people who aren't in their geographic location and can't come and visit them. So then we do lookups a lot for people who want to see something from a book or look something up in a city directory. I think that's been a really good thing. The thing to keep in mind if you are going to email a question to a library or an archive is make it really specific. Don't say, tell me everything you have on John Smith. Make sure that it's something that they can actually research and find for you. Keep it specific. Say, can you search the 1890 city directory for John Smith? That's much more doable than everything you have on John Smith. Or, can you tell me if so-and-so got married in 1890? We need a lot more information before we can look for something like that. Which leads me to the next point, is that genealogy collections are often arranged by location. So if you know the state and county that your ancestors were from, that is where you're going to start, and that's where you're going to find the most resources. And so if you are asking a librarian for help, and you do phrase your question, you say, well, can you tell me when John Smith got married? The first thing that we're going to ask you is, what county was John Smith from? And can you maybe narrow down that marriage, at least give me a decade or two to look for. And then we can point you in the directions of some sources, either in print or online. Some other things to keep in mind before you go and visit a library or an archives are just find out generally about the hours. Obviously now, I think still a lot of libraries, particularly your larger research libraries, are closed to the public, but many of them are answering the telephone. And if they're not answering the telephone, then I'm sure they're checking their email, because that's something that can be done by the staff from home. So you should still be able to get in touch with people, even though a lot of the libraries are closed right now. And now if the staff is actually unable to be in the building, then they may just have to tell you that they can't, do your city directory lookup or look that name up in a book for you until they get back. But you should be able to have some contact with the staff at most research libraries at this point, I would think. Probably the very first type of research that records that you want to be looking for are vital records. And those are just birth, marriage, and death certificates. Most states did not start keeping these types of records until the late 19th or the early 20th century. I use Alabama as an example because that's where we are and that's what I'm most familiar with. So Alabama began registering births and deaths in 1908. Now before that, each county was required to keep a birth and death register, and that started in 1881. Unfortunately, many of those registers just haven't survived. So it's very unusual to find an official government record of a birth or a death in Alabama before 1908. Because marriages were kept by the counties, you can find marriage records usually from the time the county was created. And the state required the registration of marriages at the state level beginning in 1936. And like I said, many states actually instituted laws surrounding the keeping of vital records around the same time as Alabama. So you may find some earlier and you'll find some even later. But the late 19th, early 20th century is when real interest in that started gaining traction. So for Alabama vital records, some things to keep in mind are that there is a 125-year waiting period on Alabama birth certificates. So if it has to have been 125 years since the date of birth before that document is public record. Now you can get access to it if it's your own birth certificate, your parents, your brothers or sisters, or your children, but no one else should be able to have access to an Alabama birth certificate. 125 years is a really long time. That hasn't even actually expired yet. It hasn't been 125 years since 1908. So technically no Alabama birth certificates are public record yet. Alabama death certificates have a 25-year waiting period for them before they are available publicly. So that means that it has to have been 25 years since the date of death that's on the certificate. Again, if it's your parents, your child, your sibling, you can get access to it earlier than that, but no one in the general public or who's a more distant relation can have access to it before that point. Marriages are actually public record from the time they're created. So anybody can have access to an Alabama marriage license at any time. One thing to keep in mind about those birth and death certificates around the 1908 time period is that it took a while. It took 10 to 15 years for the state to become largely compliant with that law. So even if you're looking for a birth or a death certificate that occurred, 1910, 1915, don't be surprised if you don't find it. Most of the state was still quite rural at that time. So someone who might have been born at home with a midwife, far from a metropolitan area or from an area that had a hospital, is unlikely to have a birth certificate if it was in the years immediately following when the law was created. So the same for death certificates. There is an index to Alabama death certificates that covers 1908 to 1974. That is available on the Family Search website. So that's one of the websites we'll mention probably several times during the presentation, and then we have a list of websites at the end. But if you're not already using the Family Search website, and that's just familysearch.org, then do spend some time on that website and become familiar with it. It has lots of great indexes on there. But as we mentioned, with the privacy restrictions on birth certificates, there's no online index to any Alabama birth certificates. While lots of states do have death indexes and even databases that have images of their death certificates, it's very unusual to see birth indexes or images of actual birth certificates, just because most states have those privacy restrictions and those confidentiality laws. Laws like this are passed at the state level, so each state is going to be different depending on when they actually began keeping the records and on what their privacy restrictions are. So you're going to have to go in and actually determine what those restrictions are for each state that you need a birth or a death certificate from. So, and you have to know where the person was born. You have to know at least what state they were born in before you can even begin to do that type of research. But if you just go on most states, health department, there's the public health department for most states has that information right there on their website. You can just click on the link that says vital records or birth certificates and death certificates, and it will tell you how long they have the records and who is able to access them. You can't usually order copies of birth and death certificates directly from most states. You can fill out a form, send it in by mail, or you can use a site like vitalcheck.com. Let me give you that web address. It is, let's see, we'll go to the end here. Oh, I don't have it. I will include it in the email that I send tomorrow, but it's a third-party website that allows you to pay with a credit card online, and they will get the birth or the death certificate to you. You have to pay a fee. You have to pay their fee on top of what the state's charging. in order to get the information, but that is a way that you can order birth or death certificates online. And like I said, each state's going to be different, so just do a little checking. And because states don't start keeping these records until, the early 20th century, it's not going to take you very long before you've gotten to the point where you can't find vital records and in your genealogy research. To get back to the early 20th century, most people are going to do that in 3, 4, maybe 5 generations. And then you still want that type of information, but you're not going to be able to find it in one handy document like you do when you have a birth or a death certificate. And that's where church records can come in handy. And if you know a little bit about your family, about the family history or their country of origin, those can give you clues to your ancestors' faith or even their church membership. So for instance, many immigrants from Ireland or Italy probably may have been of the Catholic faith. Immigrants from Scotland often were Presbyterian. So just knowing a little something about the family can kind of get you started and looking for church histories. And it may be that the family has, for sure they've always been Baptist or they've always been Methodist. So that can give you a head start in maybe locating those church records. If you have absolutely no idea where the family would have worshiped at that time or, in their history, there are still places you might be able to find that information. If you have a city directory or a county history for the area where they were living, that can give you an idea of what were the major churches or what were the major faiths that people had in that area at that time. City directories will list the churches and they'll tell you the addresses and the names of the ministers. So that can just give you a good idea of how many, maybe there were lots of Baptist churches and very few Presbyterian churches. So that can help direct your research. If you know the church that your ancestor attended and that congregation is still active, by all means, just contact them. Ask them if they have baptismal records or marriage records or records of burials or even just church rosters, membership lists of memberships, lists of officers, meetings of minutes, things like that can all be important when you're doing your genealogy research. If you've got a marriage license and the officiant of the person who performed the marriage is on the marriage license, then you can actually use that person's name, maybe look them up in a city directory. If that person was a minister, then it will tell you what church they were the minister of. So that's going to be an important clue as to where your ancestor, probably worshiped. Old newspapers often have lots of stories about churches. Maybe a new minister comes or new officers have been elected, or a lot of the ladies groups, the women of the church are having their monthly meeting or they've elected new officers. Those are often going to be written about in the local newspapers. And then things like wedding announcements and obituaries can be very important clues to church membership for your ancestors. Even place of burial, because lots of cemeteries are adjacent to churches and owned by churches. So if you have an ancestor who's buried next to a little country church, that's probably a good indicator that that's the church that they attended. And like I said, if that church is still active, then there's a chance you could get some records from them that would mention your ancestors. If the church is not active anymore, which does happen quite a lot, churches split for various reasons over theological differences, or maybe congregations grow old and the church kind of dies out, or maybe it picks up and moves. There's a really big church in Hoover called Hunter Street Baptist Church. And it's not on Hunter Street at all. It's not anywhere near Hunter Street. But at one point it used to be. But that congregation, that congregation, the people who lived in that area, it was just not active, very, very active. So they kind of picked it up and moved it to another part of town. And it's a substantial church right now. But there are lots of things to keep in mind about the history of the church that can help you determine if that's one that your ancestor might have attended. And that's, again, where a good county history could come into play. And most large Protestant denominations, and as well as Catholic and the Jewish faith, they have historical repositories. They have history centers. They have archival repositories. So if a congregation does cease to become active, They can't really mandate it or make it happen, but when a church folds, they really are supposed to send their records to one of these bodies, to their historical center, to a university that's identified as a records repository. Those records aren't supposed to just disappear. The church secretary isn't supposed to take them home with her and forget about them. That probably happens a lot. It's not supposed to. So hopefully if you have identified a church that your ancestors attended and it's no longer an active congregation, you can at least track down those records through the faith's history center or records repository. And some of those are actually here in Birmingham. We know Samford University has a lot of records of churches from the Baptist faith, and actually they actually have histories, a lot of church histories, printed church histories from not just the Baptist faith. Lots of other denominations are in that collection, and because they are a well-known genealogy collection, and they have a church affiliation, I think a lot of people, when they do a church history, they make sure that to give a copy of it to a library like Samford, because they know it's going to be taken care of and they know people are going to always have access to it. We have a nice collection of church histories here at the library. And you see those church histories a lot when a church has like a milestone anniversary, like their 50th or their 75th anniversary. They form a committee to write a book, and they, the committee usually gives you a nice brief history of the church, pictures of all of the ministers if they can locate it, lists of officers and founding members and things like that. So they can be really nice books, and some of them are really well done and have transcribed maybe church minutes or baptism records, marriage records, things like that, things that would be really valuable to a genealogist. So, checking the card catalogs again of local libraries and major universities that are known to keep church records and church histories could be a good place to start. And don't overlook the little small libraries too, because sometimes those county histories or those church histories are just, written by somebody local. Maybe they're not professionally bound, and, they're just little short kind of homemade books. And those books like that aren't going to be distributed widely but they are going to be given to the local library. So a small library, it may have items about that community, about that local history that a large library is not going to have. We love to have things like that in our collection, but we can't always find them. We don't always know that they've been created in order for us to acquire them. So if someone doesn't give them to us, those may not find their way into our collection, but they may very well be in the library in that community. And that library may be small and they may not have much of an online presence, but you still can get a phone number or an email for them and just call them and ask them, or write them and ask them about their local history collection. Courthouse records are another huge source of information for genealogists. Most at the time when our ancestors were interacting with the government at any level, it was at the county level. You didn't have a lot of interaction with the federal government or the state government. You would have some, but most of the day-to-day interaction that our ancestors had with their government was at the county level. That's where they recorded the marriages, the buying and selling of property, wills, and other documents relating to probate and records that are created when someone died. County boundaries have changed over the years. Be mindful of that. If you're not finding records in the county where you think your ancestors lived, check out the boundaries for that county, because your ancestors may have lived in several counties even without ever actually moving, because in the early days of most states, you had very few counties, and they were quite large. And then as the states became more settled, those large counties would get chopped up into lots of smaller counties. So you could have ancestors with records in multiple county courthouses, even though they themselves had not moved, just because their county boundaries change.
I have a question about that. Is there a place where you can go to find out the dates of when those counties might have changed their boundaries. I know when I have written for some information, they say it's not in that county, but I didn't know whether to ask about another county or not, because I didn't know when those boundaries had changed.
There is a great source called Historical County Boundaries by I think by the Newberry Library in Chicago. Printed that, and if I'm clever, and I may not be clever enough, I can get out to the internet. Let's see, and I can show you what that looks like. Okay, are you seeing just
Zoom?
Zoom? Okay.
Yeah, now I'm seeing the ocean.
I know, I love those pictures. Yeah, Atlas of Historical County Boundaries Project is what you want.
Okay.
And I think if we click on Alabama, yes, we get a nice interactive map. And so here's Alabama, and it's showing me the county boundaries as of 1817, March 3rd, 1817. But then if I scroll down to all of these different dates and I click on it, you see the map changes.
Great.
So yeah, and that one by Newberry is incredibly detailed. I mean, even if one little county snips off a piece of another county, they've documented it. We have another source that we use that only goes by census year. This is much more detailed. It gives you everything. So does that help?
Yes, and then the other part of that was I had a grandparent who was born in Los Angeles. Well, Los Angeles was 2 different counties, so I had to guess which county he was a part of because I didn't have an address. And of course, I must have sent it to the wrong one because they couldn't find his record. Now, he was born in 1905, and it could be that they didn't have a record back then. So
yeah, check that first. Just go to like the California Department of Public Health. And then there's another site you can use called, this is from the CDC, where to write for vital records. And that just takes you state by state and gives you in a nice, really easy to digest format when they started keeping the records, where you go and write to them.
see, July of 1905. He was born in May. So he's probably the
Department of Public Health. So sometimes you have to dig around a little for it and click on several links to find what you're looking for. But okay, if the birth occurred between 1905 and 1957, they should have the record. So, you know,
well, except that up at the top it said July 1905 on that last page before that, and he was born in May, so they may not. Yeah, somewhere it said that. I'm not sure. Right there, since July 1905, and he was born in May.
Goodness, you just missed it.
I know. I mean, I know I know because he told me, and he put it in our family record that he was born, you know, in Los Angeles in 1905 in May. So I've got his verbal and written confirmation. I was looking for the document, and
it does say in here, and this is something to remember. I don't know how much luck people have with it. You know, for earlier records, contact the county recorder in the county where the event occurred, because sometimes counties were keeping that information before it was, you know, mandated by the state. So that is something to keep in mind. Is that what you'd already done when you said you?
Yeah, I sent it to the county that looked like it covered the most of Los Angeles, and they couldn't find it, and I never followed up on it after that.
So it may be what you have to do is go back to the county boundaries, and that's my email, and see where that, you know, what county was covering that area in 1905.
Right.
Maybe that'll be something that'll help.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So I think we're pretty much through with vital records. Like I said, marriages are available from the time they're created. There's no waiting period on marriages. And even if a state has already mandated that they are keeping them, you can go back earlier and get them from the county. So census records are my favorites. They are just the most comprehensive resource for genealogy. They're for everybody. Literally everybody in the country is supposed to be counted in the census. The first one was in 1790, and they have been taken at 10-year intervals ever since. The 2020 census is actually ongoing. They pushed the date for 2020 responses back until October, I think, due to the coronavirus. So they want to make sure that they get as many responses as possible in the 2020 census. You know, the only reason that the United States takes a census, it's mandated, it's a federal law that we do a census every 10 years, but really the only official reasons for that are to determine the borders of our legislative districts, to redraw those borders if large population shifts have occurred, and to determine the distribution of federal funds. And that's a huge reason why you're hearing a lot about the 2020 census and why it's so important for you to respond, because that will determine how federal funds are distributed within your state. So they want as many responses as possible. And there is, you know, and if you do have a lot of people who are undercounted, it could actually result in your state losing a seat in the House of Representatives. And there's some concern about that in Alabama this year. If our population goes down, we could lose one of our seats in the House of Representatives. But beginning in 1790 and going through 1840, the census only lists by name the head of the household. So again, you know, the census isn't created for genealogy research. So, you know, they didn't include the name of everybody. They just put the name of the head of the household. That's usually the husband and the father of the family. Not always, but it usually is. And everybody else in the household is only going to be counted. Their ages will be broken down, their genders will be broken down, and then they'll just be counted. 1850 is the first census to list the name and age of everyone in the household. The 1880 census, I don't have this on the slide, but the 1880 census takes it one more step further and tells you how everybody in that household relates to the head of the household. So if you've got what looks like a nuclear family, a husband, a man, a wife, they have the same last name, they're approximately the same age, and then you have a bunch of children who also have the same last name, you know, you assume that that is a family, a mother, father, and the children. Well, now starting in 1880, it will actually tell you, okay, this is the wife, and we'll have a little W by her name, and then S for son and D for daughter. And where that really comes in handy is if you have just some kind of what looks like a random person in the household. Before, you might just have to guess how that person relates to the head of household or to anybody else. Now it's going to tell you, okay, is that random person an older relative of the husband or the father? Is she a grandmother? Is she a mother-in-law? You know, and a multi-generational household is such a wonderful thing to find in the census. And, you know, if you've got a woman and her name doesn't match anybody else in the household, but she's 20, 25 years older than the head of the household and his wife, you know, now you know, oh, this is his mother. This is his mother-in-law. Now you've got another name to look for. You've got the age of another generation, so you can go back and look for that person. So that's a really, really good thing to have. And like I said, I love it when you find a multi-generational household, because it's just like this wonderful little present, and it automatically takes you back another generation. The 1940 census is the latest one available to do genealogy research. The personal information that is collected by the census takers, the names, the ages, occupations, all of that is kept sealed for 72 years. And that is a federal law. So you're not going to see some states opening up the census before other states. 72 years across the board for all of the states. So that means that the 1950 census will not be available until 2022. Yes, ma'am. Nope, okay. So we're still using the 1940 census. The supplemental schedules, if you've never done any research using those supplemental schedules, like the mortality schedule or the agricultural schedule, if you can find copies of those for the area that you need them, spend some time looking at those. They're so interesting. Ancestry has done a really good job of digitizing the supplemental census schedules for the Southeast, lots of the Northeast, and to be honest, I haven't needed to do too much research in the Midwest or the West Coast, so I'm not sure what their coverage is like there. But I know they've got mortality schedules and agricultural schedules for a lot of the southeastern United States. The mortality schedules are particularly interesting. Those and most of the supplemental schedules are done in like 1850, 60, 70, and 80. And the mortality schedules is a list of names for everyone who died in the year before the census was taken. So if you had an ancestor who died in 1859, there's a really good chance they'll be on the mortality schedule. And that will include their age, their cause of death. If they were ill, it might tell you how long they were ill, what their occupation was, lots of good information on those supplemental schedules. An interesting thing about them is that they did them in 1850 and 1860, so years prior to emancipation. So if an enslaved person died and is included on the mortality schedule, you will see their first and probably last name. You will see what their occupation was, and you'll see their cause of death. So it's almost as a complete an entry as you would find on a population schedule, but none of the enslaved persons are listed by names in the regular population schedules. So for many people, this may be the only place you see a first and a last name and biographical information about an enslaved person. Another supplemental schedule is there were slave schedules done in 1850 and 1860. They're a lot like those really early census records, though, in that they don't list everyone by name. The only person listed by name on a slave schedule is the slave owner. And then the enslaved persons will be counted and broken up by age and gender, much like people are in those early population schedules. But if that is a resource, if you're doing African American research, don't overlook the mortality schedules or the slave schedules for 1850 and 1860. For the general population schedules, the questions change. Every year the questions are different, so it's a good idea to have kind of in mind what your ancestors are actually responding to. If you can't read the column headings on the census pages, then you can always download a clean extraction form that has those questions printed out in nice, easy to read print. Or there are lots of places where you can just Google census questions 1870, and it will tell you what the questions were for that year. Some of the more interesting ones you'll see are like in 1930, they asked, did people have a radio in their house? Radios were the new technology, and so they were kind of interested in how many people had those. They often ask, is the house owned or rented? What is the value of the home? What's the how many years of education does everyone in the household have? What is their native language, if it's something other than English? Sometimes they'll ask how many years you've been married, how many children you've had, how many children have lived. So if you see a woman and she's got one answer for how many children you've had, and then another answer, a different answer for how many children are still living, then you know there's been a loss in that family. And that might be something that you want to investigate. So if you really drill down into the census, look at every question and see what your ancestor responds to, then you're going to get them at the most out of census records. And people at every level of their research skills and at every point in their research journey, you're going to have to look for census records. Experts, beginners, everybody really has to come back to the census. And it's such a wonderful snapshot of our country at those 10-year intervals. And because it is designed to capture everyone in the country, it's an incredibly democratic resource. It's not, just for, it's not like a biographical dictionary that just includes the rich and the politicians. It's for absolutely everybody. And you can see so many changes happening over the history of our country. And you can see how your ancestor participated in that and maybe drove some of those changes. And I think it's just a really important use for historians as well as genealogists. It's everything, and it's everybody. So I really do think census records are probably the best thing that you can do in your genealogy research. And just to kind of finish up, you always want to evaluate your information. Original records are regarded as being more accurate than a compiled or a transcribed record. You know, every time you have somebody who takes a record and they index it or they transcribe it, you introduce another chance for errors to be made. And those errors can be perpetuated indefinitely if you never consult the original record. You know, people just repeat, they take what they see as gospel and they just repeat it in their own research. So if you can, always look at an original record. But there are reasons why those transcription errors occur, because the handwriting is unfamiliar. Sometimes the names are, not what we're expecting. The terminology's not what we're expecting. So it's easy to see how those errors can occur. So do carefully study the original records once you're able to take a look at them. And so information from a secondary source like a published family history or a compiled index or a transcribed record should be carefully evaluated if you can't look at the original. But because of sites like Ancestry and Family Search, we are seeing so many original records than we were able to before. Here's just a short list of some of our online resources. And if we've got a few minutes here at the end, we'll go out and look at some of these. The library databases that we have here at Birmingham Public Library are ancestry.com, fold3.com, and newspapers.com. Right now, Ancestry may be allowing remote access to researchers in Alabama. I know they were earlier this year. I'm not sure if that agreement is still in place. But you can email the Alabama Public Library Service and find out about that. Fold3.com and newspapers.com are subscriptions that the Birmingham Public Library has purchased. So you can access those, unfortunately not now inside a library, but if you live in the city of Birmingham, you can access them from the BPL webpage from home with your library card. But if you're not in Birmingham, then you won't be able to get into either of those. Fold3 is military records primarily, Revolutionary War, Civil War, War of 1812, and even some more recent conflicts like World War I and World War II. They have draft registrations. They don't have the service records for those, but they have the draft registrations. And newspapers.com, what we have here at BPL is a subscription to the Southeastern edition, which includes historic newspapers from Alabama and most of the surrounding states, except for the Carolinas. And all of those you could purchase a personal subscription and have access to it from home at any time. And be on the lookout. If you think that you would get your money's worth out of one of those subscriptions, look for specials, maybe a free trial. A lot of times they'll be bundled. Ancestry, Fold3, and newspapers are all kind of yoked together. I think they may all be owned by the same company. So sometimes they'll bundle a subscription and you'll get a substantial discount if you buy a subscription to more than one of the databases at the same time.
Fold3 had a free access for Revolutionary War records until the 15th of this month.
That was a nice one. Yeah, Fold3 is really good about doing free trials at around holidays like Veterans Day and Memorial Day and 4th of July. Big anniversary, big kind of military anniversary holidays, they'll often do a free trial. And usually during February, they have a lot of African American databases. So a lot of times during February, they'll have free access to those databases. And just regular genealogy websites that we like. These are not anything you would have to pay for. The first one, archives.gov, that's the website for the National Archives and Records Administration, which is the federal government department, that they're the archives for the United States. That's who saves the census records. That's who makes the census records available. That's a lot of times where you get military records and immigration records, is through the National Archives and Records Administration. Now, their website is not really designed, it's not like an ancestry.com website. It's not a place where you can go and put in a name and find a record. They do have a tiny bit of that, but most of that, they're letting Family Search and Ancestry and Fold 3 take care of that aspect of it. What they are putting up as far as genealogy is a lot of content, a lot of how-to, a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of articles and blog entries about how to do genealogy research and how to utilize the records that they have at the National Archives and how to find them. They've got a lot of information, a nice handy database showing you, okay, here's what we have that's been digitized. Here's what Family Search has. Here's what Ancestry has. Here's what Fold 3 has. So that can help you, maybe help direct your attention to one of those databases if what you're looking for is not on archives.gov. Every October, they do something called a virtual genealogy fair, which is classes like this that are being streamed online by records experts at the National Archives. And they've saved all of them. And I think they go back to like 2013. So you can go back and watch all of the previous years virtual genealogy fairs. The easiest way to find that, because I sometimes have trouble finding it, because their site is vast and kind of confusing. I'm going to do a Google search. I want to be on Google. I don't want to be on Bing. Let's see, virtual fair. So yeah, here are the videos. I just put in virtual genealogy fair, National Archives and Records Administration, and they happen through an office at NARA called Know Your Records. So if you know that, then you can go in and start finding them. And once you're kind of on one, then you sort of get a whole, it starts to feed you a whole bunch of others. And some years they do it a little differently. Like you can see this video is 6 hours long. So they took all the sessions and put them on one YouTube. But some years they'll split it up. And you can kind of see over here, here's one that's, a little more doable.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Andrea Bassing-Matney. Welcome to the Know Your Records lecture. I'm very pleased to have Anastasia Harmon from.
And so, yeah, they just start right in. And you can see the handouts. You can see, you'll hear all the questions that people ask. It's meant to be viewed online. So it's not like, even if you're watching it after the fact, it's not like you've really missed out on anything. FamilySearch.org, I know we've kind of thrown that out several times already. That is the Church of Latter-day Saints genealogy website. It's a really nice website. It's gotten huge over the last few years, and there's a lot of content in there, a lot of information to take in. You're gonna find that you pretty much have to have an account to see any of the original documents or read any of the digitized books. But it's just a matter of creating, a username and a password, and then you have an account, and it'll prompt you to log in once you want to actually view something. Cindy's List has been around. They were like the very first one as far as genealogy websites go, and they're kind of a clearinghouse for information. They direct you to other genealogy sites, but it's huge. I mean, there are tens of thousands of links on Cindy's List, and they're arranged by subject. So if you're interested in Native American genealogy or African American genealogy or Canadian, you can just click on that list that in the index, and it'll give you a whole list of sites. A lot of them are free, but some of them are subscription. Findagrave.com, if you're not already using Find a Grave, definitely go and play around with that. That started out as a really small website where you could find out where celebrities and politicians were buried, and then sort of the genealogists discovered it and took over, and now it's just incredible. so many little small cemeteries, those little church cemeteries, big municipal cemeteries are on Find a Grave. You may just find a transcription of someone's tombstone. You may actually find a photograph of it, maybe even information about that person, like somebody's uploaded their obituary, or actually done an interview with some of the family members. I've seen some really elaborate ones on Find a Grave. And then obviously some very simple ones as well. So that's a really, really neat site to play around with. And it's gotten so good that we have some books of Jefferson County tombstone inscriptions here at the library. But they were done in the 70s and even earlier. And I have more luck now. Somebody calls in and looking for a tombstone. I have more luck on Find a Grave than I do in our print sources. So play around with that one. Does anybody have any questions? Anything you want to talk about that maybe you came here hoping we would talk about and didn't, or anything you want to share?
I'll just add, we also have Family Tree magazine at the Trustful Library, and they often have articles and different resources in there, and they have a website too you can look at.
I have a question about conflicting middle names. I've got on a family tree, I've got one middle name, but when I go to family search, the middle name is different, and now I don't know which one I'm supposed to follow.
Is it a lot different? Like just totally?
Yeah, his middle name is Olson according to my family history, but it's Klaus, C-L-A-U-S on family search. So it's a challenge to look him up.
And when did he live?
In the like 1880s, 90s. Mm-hmm. In Chicago, and they have him listed. I mean, in our family thing, they have him listed like as a carpenter and things like that. But like I said, in the family search, it has Klaus instead of Olson.
Mm-hmm. He could have had multiple middle names, and just at some time in his life he went by one, sometimes in his life he went by another one. In Chicago for that time period, I would imagine you could find some city directories, probably on Ancestry. So
they're listed, and they're listed, but they're usually listed Julius and not necessarily with the middle initial.
Yeah, they sometimes don't have the full name.
And he actually changed his name because he came into the country from Norway, and somewhere around that time they started telling the Norwegians they needed to have a surname, a constant surname, since historically their last name was their father's name plus son or der, if it was a daughter or son. So that evidently we didn't care for that too much, so they asked him to change his name, which he did. But that became a problem then, because now I've got two different names for him.
If I may?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yes, the difference between the two is, this is Paul. One of them is a patronymic, Olson, son of Ol, and the other one is Klaus, which could be possibly a surname. And since your ancestor is of Nordic ancestry, you would expect one or the other. So both of them are probably correct, and both of them probably refer to the very same person.
Okay. I sort of thought that might be it. I knew that Olson would be like Ole's son, but
right.
Yeah, but that wasn't his last name. He took a totally different, last name. So
right, and he probably chose that himself.
Right.
Yes.
He did. I don't want to be the only one asking questions. If somebody else has questions, has anybody thought about trying to get with all those smaller libraries in Alabama and trying to find out what records they have, and do like the Atlas of Historical Church Records that you were showing me on that they had online?
I don't know that anybody's done that exact thing, but bicentennial, the Alabama Bicentennial Commission, you know, Alabama celebrated its bicentennial from like 2016 to 2019. And part of that commission was an effort to collect and digitize the newsletters and publications of all of the local genealogical societies. So that there's a lot of little small town local genealogy newsletters that are available online now. And I think you can find those on the website of the Alabama Bicentennial Committee.
And while you're doing that, this is totally heading in another direction. I will tell you that I have a friend who has access to ancestry.com. And in the course of looking up my grandfather's information, they have him as having died in Texas, and he died in Birmingham, Alabama. And I don't know how to correct it. And but people have copied it. So now there are all these people who have his death in Texas. He never lived in Texas.
This was on Ancestry?
Yeah.
Like a user created family tree.
Yes.
Something that another Ancestry user put up. They usually put their contact information on those. So
Yeah.
if they did, I would get in touch with whoever put that family tree up there and show them the document. You have a copy of his death certificate?
Oh yeah. I mean,
scan that death certificate, send it to them and say, you know, this is just flat out wrong.
I did post it on Family Search, so to make sure it got corrected at least there, but I didn't, you know, not being a subscriber to Ancestry, I don't know how to, you know, correct it, but anyway, it's in Family Search, so hopefully that'll somehow get it fixed. But it was just real interesting to see how some information can be picked up, you know, and spread. But that was just an interesting thing that I had happen.
Yeah, and that's an example of that happening with in the modern day genealogy world. But I have an ancestor who appears in like a Georgia county history, and the information about him, this book was written in like the 1940s, and the information is really wrong. And now it's really easy to go in and find, okay, here's the marriage record, here's the census record, and what you have written is patently wrong. But that error that appeared in that 1940 book, I see repeated over and over and over again. So even though the records that prove it wrong are easy to find now, nobody's doing it. They're still just going by what was in that published source. But here is the website for the Alabama Ancestry, which was part of the Alabama Bicentennial Commission. And down here is a link to the Alabama History and Genealogy publications. And they're hosted by the Department of Archives and History, the Alabama Department of Archives and History.
Terrific.
They've done a lot, and here it is arranged by county and the institutions that helped contribute to the collection. So yeah, that was a really big undertaking.
I bet.
And actually, the Department of Archives and History, we didn't talk a lot about it, but that's another good resource if you're doing local. Let's see. There it is. But they have a lot of databases on there for their collections, and you can just do search our collections and choose from right here. They don't, you know, a lot of these you can't look at. Like this is just a list of their Alabama city directories. You can't actually look at them. But some of these are things that you can search. This 1867 voter registration database is a really interesting. It is for the whole state of Alabama, and you can search it by county. But you can also search by race, because which would be significant, because 1867 is going to be the first year that a formerly enslaved person is going to be able to register to vote. And in this database, you'll see a person's full name. So you'll see a first and a last name, This is only 2 years after the end of the Civil War. So this, outside of Freedmen's Bureau records, could be one of the first places that you see documentation of someone who was formerly enslaved. Now, because this is a voter registration database, the limitations that are in place are the person has to be at least 21, and of course it's only men because women could not vote in 1867. But there are lots of little gems here on the Department of Archives and History website. And I also like to point out that they have a significant collection of church and synagogue records. So if, if you are looking for a little small church that may be folded and they didn't send their records to their records repository or their history center, they may actually be here at the State Archives. So you can search that by county, or you can do a keyword search by denomination for that. And I use Alabama as an example, but every state has a Department of Archives and History or a state library. And every state's Department of Archives and History has a site very similar to this, where some of it you can search and actually look at. Some of it is just a finding aid or an index, but it does help give you an overall picture of what records are available in that state.
Another question that I have is, sometimes they'll say that a record is on film somewhere, like FDH or FDS or whatever that letter is.
Yeah.
How do you access those photocopies of like birth certificates or marriage or whatever it is you're trying to get a record of, when it says it's on this film? Check that film, and then you go and it just repeats the information, but it does, and it tells you the film number and everything that you're going.
Are you on the family history website, family search, when you see that?
That's that, and ancestry. I think it's FHL.
FHL, that stands for Family History Library, and so Family History Library. So the number that follows that is the film number.
Right.
History Library has, given to that. If you're on Family Search, it might be digitized, and if you have an account, you can probably see the digital images on Family Search. You may run into the situation where you click on it to see the digital image, and it tells you that you have to be in a partner library or family history center to see that. If you get that message, then yes, you will have to go to there are family history centers all over and to actually view it. Or you could come when we're open again. You can come here downtown because we're a partner library. So if it's something that's restricted to those locations, then you have to be in one of those locations to see it. But not all of their digitized records have that restriction. So definitely it's worth playing around with, with the family history catalog to see if you can view it from home. Because
you would think that if they give you the number of the location of the film, that you should be able to like even click on it and it would take you at least to the index.
What they used to do, and why they, if you see that number, is that they used to loan out that microfilm to the partner libraries and the family history centers. So you would find, you find what you needed, and you would, give that number to the library, and then they would contact Salt Lake City, and you would pay really just like $5 or $6, and they would mail the microfilm from Salt Lake City to where you were, and then you would go and look at it at that library. They discontinued their microfilm lending program probably about 3, maybe more years ago than that.
Of course they did.
Because they're doing so much digitization. So their goal is to have all of that microfilm available digitally, but they're not there yet.
So if I have the numbers, I can come to you when you reopen, and you can access those records for me so that I can get a copy of the original.
And what you can do with that number, and Paul who's on here, he's the disembodied voice. Paul is our family search expert, so feel free to chime in.
Okay, I'll do that right now. All you need to do is to go to Family Search, go to the Search tab, go down to Catalog, and type in the number of the film, and you can find out whether or not it's available digitally by the icon that comes up next to the film. If there's a camera next to it, it means that you can look at the image.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I've put the call number in and I didn't know what I was looking at when I.
You can do something with that number. So from the family search page, which is up right here, just click on search, then catalog,
Okay.
and
I see. I've never been to this one.
you can search by film or fiche number, and then put in that number. You don't have, not the FHL part, just put in the number, and then search for it, and it will show you their catalog record. And then sometimes they'll even just say outright, if you would like to see a digital image of this, click here.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, that's great. I have never been to the catalog before. I just didn't know. I clicked on something and I would fill in the name and what the dates were and things, and it would come up, and sometimes it would show what I was looking for, but I'd click on it and it still wouldn't take me to an official record. It would, I don't know what it was doing, but anyway, yeah, I'm going to use that.
And now, even though something has been digitized, that doesn't mean you can keyword search it. So you may find that you pull up the digitized images, all of the digitized images. I mean, maybe hundreds and thousands of little digitized images, and you have to kind of poke around to find the one.
I certainly don't mind poking. I just evidently was poking in the wrong place.
Your little game to see if you can get in there and find the exact one that you're looking for. But to do that and to see any of those images, you'll need that free account. You'll have to have an account with them. Anybody else? Well, I guess we'll sign off. It's 11:30, so hopefully everybody got a chance to ask their questions or learn something new. Mara, thanks so much for setting this up.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. And like I said, if you've got any questions, I'll pull the slide up again. That's our email. We are here and we'll answer the telephone, and that's our telephone number. So yeah, just send us an email or give us a call and we'll do what we can.